Welcome to The Constant, where the only constant is change, and we go for a swim in the deep blue of business, technology, and culture. I am Dziebel, and I'm here with my esteemed co-host Juan Napoli.
Hello, hi.
The
Here.
Constant is anchored at three locations: Silicon Valley, New York, and Riyadh. It brings to you a global range of events, viewpoints, and experiences, something that you can hardly find in any single place in the podcast sphere. We also draw heavily on a mix of sciences, from management to anthropology to biology to linguistics to political economy, to be able to penetrate deeper into the many ways in which innovation, AI, and other technologies have been shaping culture. This said, all the opinions expressed on this podcast are the participants only. They don't represent opinions of their employers, clients, or business partners. When we show third-party content on this podcast, it's only the content that's freely available in public domains such as YouTube and other platforms. No proprietary content is shared on this podcast without prior explicit consent from the content owners. And today, we have a very special guest on our episode 7, which is about the smart cities of the future. Our guest today is James Ehrlich, Director of Compassionate Sustainability at Stanford University School of Medicine. Hello, James, and welcome. Please tell the audience about yourself.
It's great to be here. So nice to see you. Yeah, so I am James, and I am Director of Compassionate Sustainability at the Center for Compassion, Altruism, Research, and Education in the School of Medicine at Stanford University. I made my way through the School of Mechanical Engineering, ultimately to the School of Medicine. I'm originally from New York, so quite an urban chap. My undergrad was in computer science, and back then they called it media technology, which was sort of the precursor of video games and special effects for motion pictures. And after my graduation from NYU, I moved to Northern California, where I started a video game company with some friends, working directly with George Lucas and doing also special effects software for motion pictures. So it was a really exciting, interesting moment in the transition from analog and optical effects for motion pictures to digital. And also I'm kind of the OG cartridge game guy, Sega, Nintendo, Atari, in that regard. But something really interesting happened to me when I moved out to California, because I actually moved north of Silicon Valley, north of San Francisco, about 30 minutes north of the Golden Gate Bridge, to a place called Fairfax, which is Western Marin. And people were riding horses into town for their morning latte. Okay, like hitching posts and everything. I thought I was in a movie, right? And I started to befriend these local small plot family farmers and get invited to these beautiful farm to table meals. And that spurred about the next 16 years or so of my life in case study research of organic, biodynamic, small plot family farms, eco-villages, intentional communities, co-housing, co-living. And this spark that hit me was, could we create a software relationship to the natural world? And that is what brought me to Stanford in 2000, armed with this kind of primary thesis around that. So I'll put a pin in that, and we can continue the conversation from there.
That's a fantastic story. I mean, I've lived in California for 9 years myself, and I could experience, that kind of interesting side of California, that it has everything in it. You can have, extremely high tech, then like you said, you can have towns, still, where people ride horses. So I have a good friend, who continues to take people into the backcountry in Central California on horseback. California is fascinating because it allows, for all forms of lifestyle. And maybe that's why the people come to California, because they want to build their own ways and they want to use whatever they have in order to build, a city of the future according to their needs and tastes, So that's completely fascinating. I can clearly visualize, your journey to this topic.
When I came to Stanford in 2012, I got involved initially in what's called the Solar Decathlon competition. This is a global competition, used to be U.S. Department of Energy, but then it went sort of global. And essentially there's 20 universities who compete. They have 18 months to design, but only 2 weeks to build a single home, family home concept, which is energy positive. And I was really excited about this idea of the built environment, especially related to my work in studying eco-villages and intentional communities. And as we started getting into the cohort, I realized that a smart house inside of a dumb neighborhood doesn't make much sense. So I went to the professors, at the time, Professor Larry Leifer, the PI for this particular initiative, and I explained that I thought that we could think more whole system design for neighborhood scale, in terms of bring all these homes together as a power plant, but also combining clean water, high yield organic food production, waste to resource management in circular ways, smart mobility, EV charging, et cetera, solutions, and therefore create these communities that essentially could be self-sustainable going forward. And based on my research with permaculture and regenerative resiliency, to see how these communities actually get better over time. And moreover, this was way back in 2012, 2013, I was starting to suggest this idea that software and technology and AI and machine learning and eventually robotics could play a significant role in both the design and operation of these communities. So we continued to do this research at Stanford, and then separately, I was self-funding research off campus, especially on the tech side of things. And in 2016, we realized we had the substance of a spin-off company, which I founded in the Netherlands called Regen Villages. And the idea there really was, can we create a machine learning software, AI stack software that can communicate with nature and then be able to inform the best kind of habitation on that land? How can we accelerate the process, in other words, for planning conditions, for rules and regulations, for rezoning? But moreover, how can we supplant suburban sprawl with the right kind of neighborhoods and townships that are getting better and more flourishing over time? So it's not really an elevator pitch, but that's the evolution of how we started and where we're going.
Fascinating. Juan, do you, I know you want to say something. So what are your thoughts here in James introducing his concept? Wonderful concept.
Yeah, Dr. James, it's a pleasure to see you again. And I met you in Riyadh several times. You're very passionate about working across the world and especially, supporting the work that we're doing in the Middle East, which is very important because, as you know, the Middle East is a very unique climate, and there are a lot of projects to actually, as you said, rezone, the existing ecosystem and allow for different communities to be placed in areas which in the past were inhospitable, right? You see all these giga projects like the Line and Neom that are happening in Saudi Arabia, which are aiming to really redesign the face of Saudi Arabia, for example. And Dubai has been very successful at doing some of that, right? I used to live in Dubai. I lived there for 9 years, and I have seen it grow from the times where the Burj Khalifa was just an idea to when actually it was inaugurated. And, the transformation that we can do in the face of the earth, that what humans can do is amazing. And if we put it with the right energy, with the right drive, we can create, pretty much utopia. But it's just a matter of, finding the right ways to do this, which is easy and is guided with science. And I think that's what we're trying to bring together, right? So technology, science, and the right heart into things to make sure that those things eventually help humanity rather than just being a project that will bring economic benefits to some.
Great point. And I love that you said that, because that's really germane to the work that we're doing at CCARE at Stanford in the School of Medicine, which is how we live and where we live that can reduce amygdala response and cortisol release, which are markers for long-term happy living and longevity, right? And so this is something really important, is how do we inject compassion, altruism, empathy, mindfulness into AI models? And the way we look at it is really through compassionate sustainability, in terms of actually designing places that make sense for human, animal, plant cultivation, and habitation. So I can segue into a brief demo, if you will, of our VillageOS software. That might be a good way to spur more questions, and especially on the technology side, but also on the nature side, and where we have to reassociate ourselves with the natural world. So in many ways, what we're talking about is using technology to go kind of back to where we used to live in harmony with nature.
But that's what my even was just shortly before you're going to start showing the software. So that was my kind of question of thought, because there are 10,000 cities currently in the world, and they're being defined, by the European Commission and the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, as a contiguous area with at least 50,000 inhabitants and a high population density. They didn't come up out of nothing. So they all evolved over time from villages, from smaller, nomadic communities. However, it happened over the past 5,000 years. So one of the earliest urban centers, was Çatalhöyük, that pretty much dissociated itself, from the natural environment and started creating, even 10,000 years ago, that more of an artificial environment that we're talking about. And here, you're bringing up a great point, that on the one hand, we are going further into the future, obviously, with the software that we have at hand. But at the same time, we're trying to bring something that we lost during the formation of our urban centers over the past, 5 to 10,000 years. Would that be fair to say, James?
Yes, absolutely. To look historically as well, there was a population called Trypillians, and they lived between, excuse me, Moldova and Ukraine. They were 3,000 years before Mesopotamia. And what they were doing was focusing on soil health. So it was small animal husbandry, small plot family farms, but these very large circular radial communities of tens of thousands of people. And they really were layering this beautiful soil that now you can see is the richest soil on earth, is this corridor between roughly Moldova and Ukraine. Soil health is our health, by the way.
100%. Yeah, it's the source of everything. Yeah.
Yes. So the VillageOS software is really intended for starting with landowners, especially farmers who are aging out. Then there's residential real estate developers, local regional governments who are suffering from not having skills necessarily in-house for planning, and other stakeholders like urban planners, architects, engineers, and eventually even big funds, sovereign wealth, pension institutional funds. This is an initiative that we've been working on in South Africa. It's about 30 minutes from Pretoria. So it's a really interesting context, exactly in that sweet spot of life at the urban edge. The first thing that we do, if you note, is that we load up the cadastral property boundary, property limit data. When we select it, what we've been doing is we've been building out this open source API, application program interface, that is aggregating everything relevant to place, right? So topography, habitat, hurricane zone, air temperature, ground temperature. We look at sky coverage, illumination range for solar arrays and solar panel placement. We look at wind speed, wind direction. You see everything is annualized and historical data, not only for wind turbines, but also for residential comfort. We look at precipitation. When it does rain, how can we channel the water back to aquifers, cisterns? Every drop is precious. Wildlife corridors, soil mapping, really important for our work with permaculture design. Census data, demographics, traffic patterns, property values. It's a cornucopia, really, of open data. Now, akin to my background in game design, the first thing that we do is we extrude the land grant so we can actually see where the land is relative to the area and the region, especially at the urban edge. The first thing we do is we dig into an analysis on hydrology and the physics of water based on three key metrics, which is topography, the contour of the land, geospatial data, place, right, as well as climate and weather data. This starts to give us understanding of where best place suggested values for water reservoirs, for aquaculture, for fish ponds, for digesting human animal effluent in what are called living machines. Also, what are the predicted kind of year-round resiliency measures for these water bodies in terms of time of year? But this is also a really exciting place for us to start to connect with both small and large language models and foundation models, essentially creating a natural language dialogue with the land itself. Imagine being able to have a conversation with the land. What does the land want? What does the land need? The next in our analysis, which is near and dear to my heart, which is food. Most of my research is really driven by my stomach.
Not just heart.
Yes, exactly. I like to say my research is really driven by my stomach because I've traveled all around the world eating delicious food. And this is a really interesting and important kind of design challenge, which is soil health. What can we do to restore and rejuvenate soil profiles using biomass, animal waste, other kinds of organic fertilizer inputs? What's possible, in other words, for this incredible design challenge of how much full menu nutrition can we derive at the neighborhood scale? This is the idea of biodiverse, resilient, regenerative ag and farming practices. It's this lovely mix. Now, if you note here, we have this, what I'm calling golden ratio of productive open space, what the nature wants, what the nature is capable of, and now we can start to dig in to the built environment. Okay, so it's a bit like SimCity here, if you don't mind, a throwback. But the idea really is we start to get the suggested values for first responders, mobility hub locations, commercial spaces, community centers, markets, schools, sporting facility pads, things like this. But this is super exciting because now we can start to model based on the demographics, what are the kinds of housing units that we can imagine would be best suited for this community? Now, again, social affordable access as well as market rate housing. And you'll note as I'm toggling the different typologies here, we're getting real-time dynamic per square meter cost. And eventually, we'll be able to also be able to show the rate of return, or IRR, for these particular developments. Also, what's really cool is in this particular area, there's a height restriction of 3-floor apartment buildings. We want to be able to show and simulate to the local authorities the difference in having the 5-floor community, especially for social affordable access. The other really amazing thing is how much food can we grow on rooftop gardens, in the interstitial spaces, fruit trees, nut trees, berries, legumes, herbs, spices, medicinals. In other words, even if you're in a tiny apartment on your balcony and then walking through the atrium to the rooftop gardens, there's plenty of really interesting things that you can forage and bring back. Again, that access and agency, a little bit of soil microbes under the fingernails. And what that does is it's a known factor for improving health. Once we understand the demand side of this neighborhood, let's say somewhere between 800 to 1,200 families plus commercial spaces, we can go to starting to model the regenerative infrastructure related to renewable energy sources. So in this regard, we look at solar voltaic. These are called agrivoltaics, actually. We look at a combination of residential scale wind turbines, but with the biomass and biogas facilities, we get to use those digesters to fill in what's called that duckbill, right? That duckbill gap where essentially you might find that on a gray, rainy day or snowy day that you would need to have other kinds of energy generation. But it's all load balanced through something called a microgrid. But the snapshot really here is that when district utilities have interruptions or failures, these neighborhoods that we're designing are uninterrupted. Once we get this lovely, let's say, snapshot with the diorama, we can start to export more immersive, visually enticing experiences in augmented reality, virtual reality, and extended reality. And I think what's really great about this is that we can start to also see during the rainy season, for instance, how do we deal with puddling, with flooding, with rechanneling water analyzing those things, being able to re-simulate them. The same thing with different times of the year in terms of solar array performance. Also, that we know that this part of the world can get a light dusting of snow, but what happens if there's an anomaly and there's some amount of accumulation? In other words, we can look at all the different ranges and sort of now expected external forces that are making those ranges go beyond what you would expect. This gives us opportunities to really design for the future and be much more bulletproof in all of those things. Finally, on the design side of the VillageOS software is this idea of connecting to these predictive models for ESG, SDG, and carbon sequestration. So we can actually say, what does this community look like at groundbreaking? What does it look like with a slider bar 5 years, 10, 50 years later in terms of not only meeting but exceeding these environmental, social governance, sustainable development goal, carbon kinds of sequestration modeling? By the way, this then becomes a wonderful panel, a side panel for sovereign wealth, pension, and institutional funds, the big money around the world, to go through all the different lists of projects using the VillageOS software and see which ones are really close to or near to tipping point where they can provide private equity and mezzanine finance. Also, we can show the neighbors how this community can improve their property values. We can also show the neighbors how this community can be a lifeline for them to charge their phone or their devices, grab a meal, a cultural event. When they have an interruption to their services, those neighbors can come to this community and have a vibrant experience, more like a campus-like environment. Finally, I'll just say this, and this is a really important topic for our conversation, is that once the VillageOS is done designing the community and we move into groundbreaking, the software will then map a sensor network for edge AI, tiny ML, and small language models. Again, it's all about resiliency, but it is also about sustainability. So the two sides of the VillageOS software, design side, which I showed you here. The next phase for us is the operational side. We've been working with landowners, with developers, with governments all around the world, and we're really excited of where the future of technology is going for the benefit of humanity on a healthy, flourishing planet Earth. So I'll stop the share there and happy to answer questions and speak to you more.
Well, thank you so much, James. That's a beautiful, beautiful introduction. What I love about it, you managed, to paint a broad picture, that encompasses so many different components, like substantially different. So there is a software, there is a natural piece, social piece, and everything can be played together in a new kind of harmonious combination. But that's also gave me a little bit of a pause, because I want to understand, so let's look at it, through the prism, of the real world, that sometimes, is very adversarial, to some of the big, bold, beautiful ideas, that we as humans develop. Nature is not only a source of nutrients and health, but as we know, increasingly through climate change, so there is a lot of changes that are happening. And there are forest fires in California, nature is running amok in a sense and challenging and testing people's ability and their resilience to sustain themselves in whatever environments, they're used to living, because those environments are changing now dramatically. Erosion is happening in many places around the world. Obviously, there are some social disasters. We remember, the Suez Canal tanker, getting stuck and blocking vital marine traffic, for a week. It can happen for a month. There are wars are happening, and there are policy changes. There are political battles happening in different parts of the world. Speak of the U.S., even one of the most sort of like settled, and seemingly blessed country, is torn, into different directions by the political contradictions, with policy changes happening pretty much, on a monthly basis. How would your vision of the city of the future incorporate, that adverse dynamic that happens both in natural and social worlds?
So it's a great question. And as you noted from the beginning of the software demo, we talk about this open API, this open source API. And so I would say probably more than half of what we're doing is going to be open and free. And that's the celebration of what we continue to do at Stanford, which is the open source research on climate data and the expected anomalies now from what we can look forward to and prepare for in terms of resiliency measures. So that's one part, that this ability for us to intersect with lots of universities around the world. Some amazing universities in Europe, of course, but also in Saudi Arabia have had this amazing opportunity to tour and be, around brilliant people who are doing really, really interesting things in extreme climate zones, right? And we see what the Crown Prince is doing, of course, in Saudi Arabia, that there's just a lot of brilliant vision to bring forward regenerative resiliency for the benefit of generations to come, right? Now, we believe wholeheartedly that as we build each one of these lily pads, I like to say, of self-reliant, self-sustainable communities that are net contributors to food security, water security, energy security, waste management as circular waste, that they reduce burdens. They reduce burdens on local government, on regional government, eventually for nation state security. So it's a bulwark, really. It's a call to action.
Juan, any thoughts?
So what is interesting is the fact that all these years of research are coming together in different data sets that in the past were living in different places. And now you can collate all this data and you can just, with the help of artificial intelligence in real time, if you will, right, just be able to visualize how all these components will come together to address these different domains. I know the question is, how do you manage to gather all this information from different data sets or different sources, apply, the scientific method and your scientific knowledge, and eventually use artificial intelligence to create this amazing simulation that potentially can become real for people to live there, right?
Absolutely, yeah. So, we've been at this for a long time, as I've said, prior to coming to Stanford and then being at Stanford. And the back end of the VillageOS really is an agnostic, abstract framework, really. So the idea that it can ingest almost anything in the known universe and start to be able to understand its relationship to other things that it ingests. It plays an active role, in other words, in the community. It gives it not only sentience, but through our model, the objectives of compassion and empathy and balance. And then just imagine that we can create these master plans so much faster and gain the ability to change the rules in much more reasonable ways while also reducing the rhetoric. So this is really the objectives that we seek with technology.
Interesting. Yeah. So my mind immediately goes into two different directions. On the one hand, when you mentioned, James, mycelium networks, my heart rejoiced immediately because I consider myself a homegrown amateur mycologist. Growing up in Russia, we always used to go as kids, pick mushrooms and learn about them from our parents and grandparents. And I have maintained that passion for mushrooms as I moved to the US 30 years ago. And I keep going mushroom picking, everywhere I go. Kind of my best mushroom picking experience was in the Rockies at the 10,000 elevation because Americans tend to pick mushrooms. And I had all those forests, all those mushrooms all to myself at some points. At the same time, my mind is also into the AI area because when you mentioned the neural networks and the need to combine, as Juan was saying, different data sets. So a rule-based approach to AI won't work here. So you really need to train AI, in that neural network type of modality, so it learns and discovers the patterns by itself, whatever those patterns are in that diverse data. So to what extent, you are capable currently to begin training AI to start learning all of that in order to see where AI will ultimately take your vision of the city of the future, instead of trying to design it first, create some rules, and then use AI, as a way to execute those rules, with the greater data sets. See what I'm trying to get at?
I do. And I just want to say that everything we've been doing so far has been really predictive. We started this research many, many years ago and have been publishing to the UN, SDG platform briefs, and have been doing the COPs for many years now and the conferences around climate. But overarchingly, we're really looking at this idea of decentralizing AI at the neighborhood scale to also, again, reduce burdens on data centers. At the same time, we really see the bright future in the small scale. Juan knows this. I'm not a very big guy. So I think, the small is the way to go. Small is the future.
But not for the brain. You have a big brain, James.
I'll leave that for someone else maybe in the future to decipher. But it's really about being a vessel for what we're trying to do and express in the world. We view the VillageOS software as a vessel for university research, for amazing algorithmic application ideas that can be built off of the model, extendable, in other words. We look at being in service, as Juan said before, to communities, to local governments, to national governments. We look at really being in service to communities of people who reach out to us from all around the world. But going forward for us, it's rural India, sub-Saharan Africa, cross ASEAN, MENA. How do we look at these really interesting design challenges in diverse climate zones, right, where the next 2 to 3 billion people are coming to the planet? And we have to be able to create dignified housing, socially affordable, accessible housing that within their own footprint is capable of standing up a certain amount of their own daily needs, right? So we have to be predictive, again, that the VillageOS software can take that edge AI neural network, neighborhood scale intelligence, and spur these in-the-moment interventions that help the community flourish and help reduce labor costs and help increase the ability for people to live that life that's sort of projected, that people can live in kind of a beautiful relationship with AI and robotics. That's the hope.
Yeah, I mean, like you touched on a fascinating angle of creating efficiencies in the data centers, because currently that sprawl of data centers that's happening and the amount of energy that they consume, that's the foundation of AI, of the whole AI industry. Without that growth in compute power and without the huge data centers, the not so smart cities, data centers, that are flourishing now around the world, is in the Middle East, and in the US, we're creating a lot of inefficiencies there. And through my venture studio, Borderlessly, I work with one of the Silicon Valley startups that actually is developing a more efficient data center. They observed, that the current data centers, are so inefficient in terms of memory, and because they were set up in a way, that was always creating that extra memory, that's never being used. And when those data centers grow exponentially, that amount of unused memory is growing exponentially as well. So they're trying, to innovate on the basis of that fundamental, server model to increase that efficiency so that the memory is being used, more and more sustainably. We still we're talking about sustainability when it comes to the natural world a lot, but now we have to already start talking about the sustainability when it comes to AI, because everything that's going on is not particularly sustainable. Probably as humans, we always go forward, we create big growth, and with growth, comes inefficiency. And then we go back and we try to clean it up and tighten it up a little bit. In another way, where I do want to echo, one of your great thoughts is the democratization of AI. There is new startup, Liquid AI, that's trying to kind of clone the LLMs and then bring those clones into each and every device that we have. iPhones or iPads, doesn't matter, so that we can take advantage of those big cloud-based LLMs with the comfort of our own devices. That resonates with your neighborhood small LM mode of AI functioning.
Yeah, I was actually thinking about the same thing. I mean, what Danilo Ross has done with the CSAIL team in MIT and launching this liquid AI company that is modeling neural networks based on the C. lians, which is a very small worm, and how the neural network works, or the neural, the brain works for that particular biological element or animal. And we are modeling systems now that are more efficient than the systems we have. And therefore, all of these scientific breakthroughs are bringing the cost down, reducing the footprint, are making AI more accessible. And potentially one of the key things that they have done is really bring memory into this. So the system can learn over time. they have it's not a linear back propagation type of approach, but it's just kind of has so many different ways in which the system can reintegrate itself. So it really keeps memory and it learns over time. So I think that that concept and the other thing is during the Liquid AI event, one of the key things that really shocked me was that they were running this LLMs or not LLMs, we'll call it small language models in a Raspberry Pi device, right? And
Yeah,
even offline, not connected to the internet. Still could
exactly.
actually answer questions, still can actually produce some things. So if you are able to build that kind of brain at the neighborhood level, and you can actually power it with the existing resources of the neighborhood, and those systems become intelligent, you will have smart neighborhoods, right? That I can actually
Exactly.
think how do I become more efficient constantly?
Yeah.
And then everyone can play a role, in just the well-being of the overall community, which is what we all want. So some of these things that that Dr. James is trying to do with technology reminds me of things that I have seen humans are trying to do themselves, even sometimes without technology. Like I come from Argentina. We have a very poor neighborhood where I was raised. And when I went back to see my family, my sister just took me to a place that she was very proud of, where the whole community came together and cleaned up an area that was completely, a garbage area in the past. And they planted trees, and those trees now they're giving fruits and they have put some graffiti with some really real art around this. And all the neighborhood now goes there, the kids go to play and so on, and just created a whole new spirit across the neighborhood, right? So imagine that if AI can help in that domain, just bring that ideation or that drive in every single neighborhood we see. So what is interesting for me about this is, yeah, there is obviously a lot of work that has been done to build from the ground up. You have nothing, and suddenly you have a living, breathing neighborhood that is just sustainable to the best that AI can build. But also will be interesting to see how this can be done with an existing neighborhood that can be just improved a little bit, right? And then over time gets better and better because everyone just contributes a bit to make it so.
That's the
Yeah,
next generation, by the way, for us is looking at urban infill and how we can do what are called overlays for certain kinds of systems and services that we can take sort of building by building, block by block, and make them more resilient. May not be off grid, but they can be at least capable of some number of days of islanded power, water, food capabilities, things like this. So it's a
yeah,
great point. We don't want to. I don't want to leave my family and friends in New York behind either. But for now, we're definitely interested in the open spaces. I also just wanted to touch on a point that's really interesting in the evolution of sensors in a topic called memristors, which are really organic, kind of a mix between biological sensing and an electrochemical signaling. And so they're capable, almost like a mycelial network, to detect something and then be able to act on it in the moment that it interfaces with something. So it's still nascent and emerging, but everything that we're doing is really inspired by nature and in support of nature.
exactly.
It's
Yes,
a nice loop.
exactly. Yes, it's interesting. I was just having a meeting in Diriyah, in the center of the city of Riyadh, and this is where the old fort and the old city actually of Riyadh was. And now they're expanding on that area. There's a huge mega project just to expand Diriyah. And when I was asking one of the people that were showing me the place around, I said, "Oh, good, well, great. So there's going to be a lot of housing. It's going to be a big market here and so on." He said, "No, actually, there will not be very few houses. We're going to expand it, but we want to respect the fact that people has to have urban living areas, green areas. We're going to make this, a place for people to walk. There will be restaurants and so on. And so therefore, there are not going to be so many living houses." And that was interesting for me because this is one of the most expensive parts of Riyadh. And Riyadh is an expensive city today, right? So you can always obviously make more money if you just build, skyscrapers and, a lot of housing for people. But certainly the decision, from the city leaders is to say, no, we really want to keep the culture and the respect to that region, that space inside the city center, and everyone that lives there to feel happy and enjoy that place. So I think we will see more and more of what you're describing, Dr. James, as decisions that are made that are more focused on the individual and the human and the spirit, rather than just trying to, evaluate the economical benefits of just building more buildings. A bit of a difference between what I've seen in Dubai, it was just all about building more and more real estate, to what I'm seeing in Saudi Arabia, what is really about making smart moves to make sure that the city is all sustainable, there are green areas for people to just enjoy and attract more and more tourism. So it's a different approach. And I think and really believe in the fact that this will be the right approach in the future for humanity.
Yeah, I mean, we've basically seen that the new amenity for residential development is really your food basket, your energy, your circular clean water, waste to resource management, smart mobility. So you have bikeable, walkable, edible communities. So yeah, we're really excited and optimistic about AI and machine learning and robots being, as it's supposed to be, in service to humanity, and that we can really get and crack the nut on energy efficiency for low cost, low power sensing and intelligence at the neighborhood scale that doesn't have to rely on these big data centers.
I mean, I completely agree. I do want to go back a little bit to the thought that I kind of started voicing at the beginning, that I think, that all the visions of the future, smart cities or such like, they need to be adaptive to the exigencies that our life as humans, as part of the natural world, constantly brings in. And the reason I'm saying so is that we sometimes envision that the future is going to be the way we predict, the way we want it ultimately. And we design models, that seem to have increasing predictive power. But then the past always teaches us that, in a sense, things go a different way sometimes. And to what extent, we can build a model, that's only going to be kind of proven against a counter trend, let's put it this way, proven against an exigency, that we cannot predict. How can it be adaptable to something that we thought would never go back? And again, I'm drawing on some of the most recent, say, American political history, when the rise of liberalism and its progress, during the Obama years, at some point signified, yeah, that's the linear way to go forward. And then suddenly there was a flip, and the populism represented by President Trump, and the conservative forces around him flipped the tables on the liberal movement, and now it's on the defensive, and there is a different dynamic happening in the country. Similarly, growing up in the Soviet Union, we always thought that we're building communism, and it was predicted by the best thinkers at that time that socialism will replace capitalism, until one day socialism died and capitalism came back. So we always get, in a sense, in a loop, where we think we know where the future is going to be, and we design the systems that will help us predict it in the direction where we think it's going to be. But how can we make sure, our systems are adaptable to what if it's going to go south? Let's put it this way. What is it going to represent the interests of the populations that are different from ours, or the interests of cultures, that are different from ours? So, and I think, AI is equally capable. And maybe for this, we do need those large language models, to keep a broader view and incorporate, those binaries, that we're caught in as human beings, because for some reason, our culture is torn between the different extremes. We constantly go like a pendulum from one to the other. We don't really evolve linearly as much as we go back and forth between the different extremes.
Listen, I believe wholeheartedly in compassionate capitalism. I think that we take the best parts of how people can use their ingenuity to create new economic models and build great companies and great ideas that help people and do things. And that's where I think really a lot of new imagination has to start to come out. And that's really what we've been focusing on, is the right kinds of agriculture, the right kinds of aquaculture, the right kinds of permaculture planning and fluid dynamics and resiliency measures and climate and anomalies. And therefore, you're planning a community that can withstand n number of those kinds of things that cascade. And then by doing that, really the hope is, and we talked about this before, that if we have enough of these kinds of communities cropping up around the world, that collectively our subconscious starts to calm down a bit. And so those polarities can start to change. And I really believe that in the human spirit is about generosity. I really believe that when people have what they need, what they feel inside is safety, that they're interested in other people and learning from other people, other languages, other cultures. This is this amazing feeling that I get when I go to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, to be perfectly honest. It's such an amazing culture. Lovely people, kind, warm, hospitable. The food is delicious. The culture is rich. And I feel like because I have a certain level of safety in my life, I'm just wide open to learning and growing. And there's so much to learn from the kingdom.
Yes. AI, in a sense, is a very humbling phenomenon because it allows us to go back to what we're truly inimitable in. And that's not the big cognitive thinking. I can do all of that better now and probably even better in the future. But being human beings to your fellow human beings, being compassionate. And I think, that level of humility that comes with AI. And I think Jonathan Ross, from Grok, was talking precisely about that at some point, that AI teaches us humility, resonates well with what you're saying, James, and both supports, the AI development in the world, that big trend, that and big bandwagon, that everybody's on right now. But at the same time, secures a place for human beings to be better human beings toward each other.
That's my prayer. That's the absolute prayer that I have and that we have and we take with us every day. And I know we're on the right side of history. It has not been easy all the time to do the things that we're doing. We've run into all kinds of forces that prefer status quo, prefer dependencies, extractive, greedy economic models in both residential real estate development and also in business and venture capital and things like this. But I believe our perseverance and our consistency in message and the work that you can see that we're doing every day is getting better and making it more approachable, that we will be able to really deliver on these promises in a very short period of time. We're already helping landowners and developers and governments and communities. And that is what fills me with joy. I've had this wonderful journey now, almost 14 years at Stanford, to be in lots of different places and see the evolution on campus. So yeah, I'm excited about where things are going.
Absolutely. And in my 9 years at Stanford also brought exactly the same experiences. That's the constant growth, constant improvement, constant change, everything like we have it here at the Constant Podcast. Do you have any other thoughts? Because I did want to ask James a little bit about the kind of the practical, the pragmatic, the financial, and the staff aspects, of his work.
In any case, we're a small team in our spinoff company, and some folks are with me also at Stanford. Other folks, my CTO is based in Amsterdam, and we have some other programmers and developers in other parts of the world, including in Poland and in other activities we've been doing in Sweden. And so there's lots of different players involved with our team, and we're mission driven. We have, we've raised some money mostly from family offices from 2016 through roughly 2021 in what are called convertible notes. And now we're in the process of our next tranche of fundraising. And so we've got some really interesting heart-centered family offices, strategic partners, and other folks who are looking like they really want to join our journey, and always willing and always happy to meet with those kinds of folks who get what we're trying to do, see the progress that we've been making, and understand that it actually doesn't require that much capital for us to get where we want to get to, right? Because 10 years ago, we would have needed 100 million maybe to even start to think about all the heavy lifting that we had to do. But now, because of AI, machine learning, robotics, and all the amazing work in the universities like at Stanford, we feel like we can get much further, much faster with much less money. And I think that's really, really exciting, because the more we do that, we feel like the more the rules can start to change and bend in our favor, kind of like phototropism, as the plants bend towards the light, right? So the rules and regulations start to bend in our favor. And in that way, then all of a sudden, the software becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Directly with Professor Martin Fisher at Stanford University in civil environmental engineering on industrialized construction. Data-driven, coming from like the VillageOS, we can send these signals to an assembly line, controlled environment, construction, component, volumetric, using earth and building materials. And these homes get produced faster for less money, but they are nonetheless energy positive, passive, dignified, high quality homes. So from our perspective, we see that's a really important piece to this puzzle, to reduce the costs and make social affordable housing especially accessible again.
Interesting.
Fascinating, James. Well,
Fascinating.
I think we're at time. Again, Juan, anything to add? Any follow-up thoughts? I think we're at the top of our hour, even a little over. But it's been like a tremendous discussion.
Yeah.
Very
the thing that
motivating.
the thing that will be interesting to think about is in the future, right? So one of the key things that we see is space exploration and colonization of space, and we will have to start thinking about how do we build those eco villages in different planets or moons or just in space, right? And maybe there we can have just these AI systems that will be just wouldn't occupy so much space on Earth, but will generate enough energy to think and to work on these systems. So what I think is interesting about this is you're talking about a concept that is timeless. It's designing a place for the village to live, and emerged when humans just got together, and it will continue over time. And you are just tweaking DNA with AI and technology to make sure that this process that will always continue in humanity's agenda really benefits from all of the advancements in technology, right? And science as well. So it's a big applaud to you and your team for doing this.
Thank you. I just want to say, if I can, the experience of living in eco-village-like communities, because they improve over time. So it's a really exciting opportunity to feel like you're living in a healthy ecosystem, which invariably makes you feel healthy. Anyway, but it's been a great experience, having a conversation with you both.
It was terrific, James. Yeah, thank you so much.
Our pleasure.
I think lots of information. We covered so much ground, and you got to the level of detail that I think our listeners will appreciate. And you showed, your beautiful software, bringing things to life for the viewers. So I think, we're in a great spot. Thank you so much. Juan, again, great contributions, great partnership. And so we'll meet again, at the next episodes of The Constant. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much.